The night I gave birth to my first child, my parents didn't bring flowers. They didn't ask how I was feeling. They didn't ask if the baby was healthy. They told me to leave. I still remember the hospital room clearly. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. The smell of disinfectant mixed with something metallic and sharp. My body felt like it had been split open and stitched back together by someone in a hurry. My daughter was asleep in the clear plastic bassinet beside me. So small, her chest rising and falling steady and unaware of the world she had just entered. I was 29 years old, exhausted, sore, vulnerable in a way I had never been before. And I thought foolishly that becoming a mother might finally make my parents look at me differently. I was wrong. They arrived just after sunset. My mother walked in first, her lips pressed together, her eyes scanning the room like she was inspecting a hotel she hadn't approved of. My father followed behind her, hands in his pockets, already avoiding my gaze. They stood at the foot of the bed. No congratulations, no smiles. My mother spoke first, so she said, her voice flat, "You really went through with it." I remember blinking, confused. "She's healthy," I said. "She weighed 7 pounds, the doctor said." This isn't about the baby my father cut in. That was the first crack. I reached instinctively for the blanket, pulling it closer around myself, even though the room wasn't cold. Then what is it about? My mother exchanged a look with my father, a look I would come to recognize as their silent agreement, the kind they always used when a decision had already been made without me. "You can't come back home," my mother said. The words didn't register at first. They hovered in the air, meaningless sounds. What I whispered. "You heard me," she replied. "We told you from the beginning. This was a mistake." My father cleared his throat. "We raised you better than this." I felt my heart begin to pound. "I lost my job during the pregnancy," I said quickly. "Just temporarily. I can get back on my feet. I just need a little time. I can stay in my old room until—" "No," my mother said sharply. "We're not doing this." "Doing what I asked." "Cleaning up your mess," she snapped. I looked down at my daughter, at her tiny hand curled into a fist, at the soft crease in her cheek. "She's not a mess," I said, my voice shaking. "That's not what I meant," my mother said, though we all knew it was exactly what she meant. "You made your choices. Now you live with them." My father finally looked at me then. His expression wasn't angry. It was worse. It was distant. "You embarrassed us," he said. "Pregnant without a husband. No plan, no stability." "I'm your daughter," I said. My mother's jaw tightened. "You stopped acting like our daughter a long time ago." The room felt smaller, the walls pressing in. The monitor beside my bed beeped steadily, indifferent to the way my life was cracking open. "I just gave birth," I said. "I can't even drive yet." "That's not our problem," my mother replied. There it was. "Not our problem." My father shifted his weight. "You can go to a shelter or stay with a friend. People do it all the time." I stared at him, searching his face for something, anything. Regret, doubt, a sign that this was all some cruel test. There was nothing. When I asked quietly, my mother glanced at her watch. "Tonight would be best. We don't want this dragging on." I laughed then. A short, broken sound that surprised even me. "You want me to take a newborn baby and leave the hospital tonight?" "You'll figure it out," she said. "You always do." The nurse knocked softly and stepped in, smiling politely until she sensed the tension. "Everything okay in here?" "Yes," my mother said immediately. "We're done visiting." I opened my mouth to speak, but my father shook his head slightly. A warning. "Don't make a scene." The nurse hesitated, then nodded and left. My parents turned toward the door. That was it. No hug, no goodbye, no glance back. The door closed with a quiet click. I sat there in stunned silence, my hands trembling, tears sliding down the sides of my face and into my hair. My daughter stirred and made a soft sound, her face scrunching before she settled again. I leaned over the bassinet and pressed my forehead gently against its edge. "I'm sorry," I whispered to her. "I didn't know they would do this." But deep down, a part of me did know, because this wasn't the first time my parents had chosen their pride over me. It was just the first time they had done it when I was at my weakest. 2 days later, I left the hospital with one bag, a car seat I had bought secondhand, and a baby who depended on me for everything. I didn't go home. I couldn't. I drove to a cheap motel on the edge of town, paid in cash, and cried quietly into a thin pillow while my daughter slept beside me. That night, as the neon light flickered through the curtains and the sound of traffic hummed outside, I made myself a promise. I didn't know how, I didn't know when, but one day my parents would look at me again. And when they did, they would understand the cost of what they had done. The first night after we left the hospital, I didn't sleep. Not because my daughter cried, not because the motel bed was too hard or the room smelled faintly of old smoke and bleach. I didn't sleep because my mind wouldn't stop asking the same question. How could people who raised me walk away so easily? The motel room was small. One bed, one narrow window, a bathroom where the light flickered if you didn't jiggle the switch just right. I placed my daughter's car seat on the floor beside the bed because I was afraid I wouldn't hear her if she stirred. Every sound felt too loud. The hum of the air conditioner, a car passing outside, voices drifting from the room next door. I lay on my side watching her breathe. In the hospital, the nurses had told me to rest whenever the baby rested. I nodded and pretended that was possible. Now, alone in that room, rest felt like a luxury meant for people with safety nets. I thought about calling my parents. I picked up my phone at least 3 times, thumb hovering over my mother's name. Each time I remembered her voice. Calm, certain, final, not our problem. So I put the phone down. At around 3 in the morning, my daughter stirred. A soft whimper, barely a sound. I sat up immediately, heart racing, as if I had been waiting for a signal. I fed her slowly, awkwardly, my arms still sore from labor. She latched and settled, trusting me completely. That trust terrified me. "I don't know what I'm doing," I whispered to her, "but I promise I won't leave you." The words felt heavy and sacred. When she finished, she fell asleep against my chest, warm and solid. For the first time since my parents left that hospital room, my breathing slowed. Morning came too quickly. I checked my bank account while my daughter slept. The numbers stared back at me, unforgiving. Enough for maybe 2 weeks in that motel if I was careful, less if something went wrong. I called my former employer, left a message explaining the situation without saying too much. I called 2 friends I hadn't spoken to in months. One didn't answer. The other sounded uncomfortable, sympathetic but distant. "I wish I could help," she said, "but things are complicated right now." Everything was complicated. I bundled my daughter up and drove to a discount store to buy diapers and formula. I moved slowly through the aisles, conscious of every dollar. Other shoppers glanced at me, some with mild curiosity, others with impatience. No one knew I had been thrown out less than 72 hours earlier. I must have looked normal enough. Back at the motel, I fed my daughter again, then placed her gently on the bed while I sat on the floor with my back against the wall. I slid down until my knees were drawn to my chest. That was when the tears came. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady, exhausted sobs that shook my shoulders while I pressed my fist into my mouth so I wouldn't wake her. I wasn't crying because I was homeless. I was crying because the people who were supposed to catch me had stepped aside and watched me fall. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was my mother. For a moment, I considered not answering. Then I did. "Where are you?" she asked without greeting. "I'm safe," I said. "That's not what I asked." I stared at the wall, at a small stain near the ceiling. "I'm handling it." She exhaled sharply. "This is exactly why we didn't want you back home. You're always so vague, so unprepared." I closed my eyes. "I just had a baby." "And now you have responsibilities," she replied, "which you should have thought about sooner." Silence stretched between us. I thought maybe, she continued, her tone shifting slightly, "once things calm down, you might consider other options." My stomach tightened. "What kind of options?" "You're not in a position to raise a child alone," she said. "Adoption exists for a reason." I felt something inside me snap. "No," I said. "You're being emotional," she replied. "No," I repeated louder. "I'm being her mother." She scoffed softly. "We'll talk again when you're thinking more clearly." The call ended. I sat there for a long time, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the deadline. That was the moment something hardened inside me. Not hatred, not bitterness. Resolve. That night, after another long feeding, I sat on the bed with my laptop balanced on my knees. My daughter slept beside me. Her tiny fingers curled around nothing. I updated my resume. I applied for jobs I felt underqualified for, and some I knew I could do with my eyes closed. I searched for transitional housing programs, childcare assistance, anything that might keep us from slipping further. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. I didn't ask my parents for help again. Days blurred together. Sleep came in fragments. My body ached constantly. Some nights I lay awake counting the breaths between my daughter's movements, terrified of losing her, terrified of failing her. One morning, as I loaded her into the car seat, my hands shaking with fatigue, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked older than I had a week earlier, but I also looked present. There was no one left to impress, no one left to placate, no one left whose approval I needed to survive. It was just me and her. A week later, I received an email from a small nonprofit organization. They had a short-term housing program for single mothers. It wasn't permanent. It wasn't perfect. But it was a door. I packed our things that same day. As I drove away from the motel, I glanced at my phone once more. No new messages, no missed calls. My parents hadn't checked in. I didn't know then that this was the beginning of a decade that would reshape me completely. I didn't know how many nights I would cry quietly so my daughter wouldn't hear. I didn't know how strong I would have to become. All I knew was this: they had cast us out at our most vulnerable, and one day they would see exactly who we became without them. The nonprofit housing building sat on the edge of town between a closed grocery store and a tire shop that smelled like rubber and oil even from the parking lot. It wasn't welcoming. But it wasn't temporary like the motel either. That mattered. The woman at the front desk spoke softly, as if loud voices weren't allowed to survive here. She handed me a clipboard and explained the rules: curfew, mandatory check-ins, parenting workshops, job placement meetings, no visitors without approval. I nodded through all of it. Rules didn't scare me. Uncertainty did. The room they gave us was small but clean. One bed for me. A crib already assembled against the wall. A window that faced the back alley where delivery trucks rattled by in the early mornings. I placed my daughter gently into the crib and watched her sleep. Her face was fuller now, less fragile, still perfect. "This is home," I told her quietly. For now. The first few weeks were the hardest, not because of the schedule or the lack of privacy, but because the adrenaline wore off. The shock faded, and what remained was bone-deep exhaustion and a loneliness that settled into my chest like a weight. Other women lived there too, each with their own stories. Some spoke openly, others kept to themselves. We nodded in hallways, shared microwaves, exchanged polite smiles without questions. I learned quickly not to compare pain. At night, after my daughter fell asleep, I lay awake listening to the building breathe. Pipes knocking, doors opening and closing, babies crying through thin walls. Sometimes I imagined my parents' house, the spare bedroom that still had my childhood desk, the guest towels folded neatly in the bathroom, the refrigerator always full. They had space. They had money. They had chosen not to use either for us. That realization no longer made me cry. It made me alert. At the first mandatory workshop, a counselor talked about breaking cycles, about recognizing patterns passed down through generations. I sat in the back, my daughter strapped to my chest, her weight grounding me. I already knew about cycles. My mother believed love was conditional. My father believed silence was easier than confrontation. I had learned both lessons well, until now. The job placement meetings came next. Resume reviews, mock interviews, lists of employers willing to hire single mothers. One name on the list stood out: a small bookkeeping firm looking for a junior assistant. Flexible hours, remote work possible after training. I applied that same night. The interview was over video. I sat at a desk in the common room while another mother watched my daughter nearby. My hair was pulled back, my clothes were plain, but my answers were steady. I talked about attention to detail, reliability, learning quickly. I didn't mention that I had been thrown out days after giving birth. I didn't mention my parents at all. I was hired 2 days later. The pay wasn't impressive, but it was consistent. Consistency became my religion. I built routines around my daughter's needs: feedings, diaper changes, short walks when the weather allowed. I worked during her naps, studied basic accounting tutorials at night. I stopped waiting for help. That was the biggest shift. At first, I told myself it was temporary, that once my parents cooled down, they might reach out, apologize, offer support in some indirect way that allowed them to save face. Weeks passed, then months. Nothing. No birthday message. No inquiry about their granddaughter. The silence was not passive. It was deliberate. I began to understand that this was not punishment. It was erasure. One afternoon, while sorting receipts for a client, I caught myself smiling. Not because I was happy, but because something felt solid for the first time in my life. I was doing this, alone, and surviving. When my daughter turned 6 months old, I moved out of the nonprofit housing into a small, one-bedroom apartment. The walls were thin, the rent was high for what it was, but it was ours. I placed her crib in the corner of the bedroom and taped her first drawing above it. Scribbles, color everywhere. I worked longer hours, took on extra clients, said yes to tasks other people avoided. My supervisor noticed. "You're reliable," she said once, almost surprised. "That's rare." I nodded. Reliability had been beaten into me early. The years moved quietly but relentlessly. My daughter grew. She laughed. She asked questions. She clung to me when she was scared. I became the person she looked for in every room, and that changed me. When she was 4, she asked about my parents for the first time. "Where's your mommy?" she asked, her voice curious, not accusatory. I froze. Then I said carefully, "She made choices that hurt me." "Does she hurt you now?" my daughter asked. No, I said honestly. She considered that. Then you're okay. I swallowed hard. Yes, I said, I am. I didn't poison her with bitterness. I didn't rewrite history. But I didn't lie. That was another boundary I drew and never crossed. When my daughter was 6, I received my first promotion. When she was 8, I started taking night classes online. When she was 9, I moved us into a better apartment near a good school. My life did not explode into success. It built itself slowly, brick by brick. And all the while, my parents stayed silent, until the 10th year. The message arrived on a quiet Tuesday afternoon while I was helping my daughter with homework at the kitchen table. My phone buzzed. A name I hadn't seen in years lit up the screen. My father. I stared at it for a long moment. My daughter looked up. Who is it? I turned the phone face down. Someone from my past, I said. The truth was, I already knew. They didn't reach out because they missed me. They reached out because something had changed. And whatever it was big enough to finally make them remember I existed. I just didn't know yet that they were about to invite me back. Not as a daughter, but as a solution. I didn't return my father's call that day. I watched the phone go dark in my hand, then slid it into my pocket like it was something sharp. My daughter bent over her homework again, pencil tapping against the paper as she tried to remember her multiplication tables. I didn't want my reaction to touch her, not yet. That night, after she fell asleep, I sat alone at the kitchen table with the light off the glow from my laptop screen, the only thing cutting through the darkness. I replayed the sound of the vibration in my mind. My father never called without a reason. He had texted birthdays in the past, generic messages, polite distance, but a call meant urgency or need. I didn't answer until the next morning. Hello, I said, my voice calm. He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath. I wasn't sure you'd pick up. I wasn't sure I would either, I replied. There was a pause. Then the familiar tone crept in. Controlled, measured. The voice he used when he wanted something without admitting it. How are you, he asked. I almost laughed. I'm fine, I said. What do you need? Another pause. Longer this time. That's direct, he said. I've learned not to waste time, I replied. He cleared his throat. Your mother has been unwell. I closed my eyes. What kind of unwell, I asked. Nothing life-threatening, he said quickly. Too quickly. But things have been stressful. Of course they had. And I prompted. She's been thinking a lot about family, he continued. About mistakes. I waited. She wants to see you, he said finally. Both of you. Both of you. He meant my daughter. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Why now, I asked. He didn't answer immediately. There are changes coming, he said. We thought it would be good to talk. Good for whom? I pictured my parents' house, the driveway, the front door I hadn't walked through in a decade, the room that used to be mine. I also pictured my daughter, 10 years old now, sharp, observant, not easily fooled. I'll think about it, I said. That's all we ask, he replied, relief audible. After we hung up, I didn't move for a long time. That night, I told my daughter the truth in pieces. My parents want to see us, I said. She looked up from her book. Why? I don't know yet. Are they nice? She asked. The question caught me off guard. Sometimes I said carefully, sometimes they aren't. She nodded, absorbing that. Do we have to go? No, I said immediately. We don't have to do anything. She thought for a moment. Do you want to go? That question mattered more than she knew. I want answers, I said. She considered that, then shrugged. Okay. I realized then how much I trusted her, and how much I needed to protect her from the parts of my past that still hurt. We drove there the following Sunday. The house looked exactly the same. Same white siding, same trimmed hedges, same mailbox with my father's name etched neatly into the metal. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. You okay, my daughter asked. Yes, I said. And for the first time, it wasn't a lie. My mother opened the door before we knocked. She looked older, smaller. Her hair was grayer. Her eyes scanned me quickly, then dropped to my daughter. She smiled. Too quickly. So this is her, she said. She looks just like you did. I didn't respond. My father stood behind her hands clasped, expression unreadable. Come in, my mother said. The living room smelled the same, lemon polish and something floral. The furniture hadn't changed. Even the photos were arranged the same way. Except there were no new ones. No photos of my daughter. She had never existed here. We sat. My mother fussed over my daughter, offering snacks, asking questions. My daughter answered politely, glancing at me, occasionally checking my reactions. I watched everything. The way my mother avoided my eyes when certain topics came up, the way my father leaned back as if trying to make himself smaller. Finally, my mother folded her hands in her lap. We've been meaning to talk to you, she said. I nodded. Then talk. She blinked, clearly not expecting that. We may have been harsh, she said, back then. Harsh. You threw me out 2 days after I gave birth, I said evenly. My father flinched. That was a different time, my mother replied. You were young. You didn't have a plan. And now, I asked. She hesitated. Now you've proven you can manage, she said. You're stable, responsible. I almost smiled. So that was it. They didn't regret what they'd done. They regretted that I survived without them. My father leaned forward. There are some legal matters we need to discuss, he said. There it was. Regarding what I asked. The house, he replied. The will, future arrangements. My pulse quickened. My mother reached out and touched my daughter's arm. We want her to have security. I stood. Don't, I said quietly. My mother froze. You don't get to reach for her like that, I continued. Not without understanding what you lost the right to. Silence filled the room. My daughter stood beside me. She took my hand without hesitation. I think we should go, I said. My father looked panicked. Wait, please. I turned back to him. If you want to talk, I said we do it on my terms, with full honesty, and no pretending the past didn't happen. He nodded quickly. Of course. I looked at my mother. She said nothing. We left. As I buckled my daughter into the car, she looked at me. They're scared, she said. I blinked. What makes you say that? They kept looking at you, she replied, like you might say no. I smiled then. She was right. And they should have been. Because I hadn't come back to be welcomed. I had come back to understand exactly what they needed from me, and what it was finally worth. I didn't hear from them for 3 days after that visit. No calls, no texts, no follow-up pretending everything had gone well. That silence told me more than any apology ever could. They were regrouping. I recognized the pattern immediately. It was the same one my parents had used my entire childhood. When something didn't go according to plan, they paused, recalculated, and returned with a version of events that made them look reasonable and me look difficult. Only this time I wasn't a child sitting at their kitchen table learning how to stay quiet. This time I was the one holding leverage. On the 4th day, my father called again. I've been thinking about what you said, he began. I let him talk. We didn't handle things well, he continued. We can admit that, but we're not the villains you seem to think we are. I almost interrupted him, but I didn't. I had learned that letting people talk long enough usually revealed the truth faster than confronting them. We were worried, he said, about appearances, about responsibility, about what people would say. There it is, I replied calmly. People. He sighed. You don't understand the pressure we were under. No, I said. You don't understand the pressure I was under. I had just given birth. I had nowhere to go, and you sent me away. Silence. Then carefully, we thought you'd come back once you realized how hard it was. That sentence landed harder than anything else he had said. You thought suffering would teach me a lesson, I said. We thought it would make you rethink your choices, he corrected. I closed my eyes. They hadn't thrown me out because they couldn't help. They had thrown me out to break me. And when I didn't, I asked. Another pause. When you didn't, he admitted things became complicated. There it was. What's changed, I asked. The house, he said. And the business. My grip tightened on the phone. He explained slowly, carefully, like someone trying not to spook an animal. The business he and my mother had relied on for decades wasn't doing as well as they'd expected. Contracts had shifted, expenses had risen, retirement plans were no longer as secure as they once were. And the house, I asked, it's worth more than it used to be, he said, but it's tied up in ways that limit our options. I said nothing. You're good with numbers now, he continued. You've built something. We thought you might advise us. Advise. They didn't want their daughter back. They wanted her expertise. And my mother, I asked. She's anxious, he said. About the future, about legacy. Legacy. I laughed softly. You erased me from your lives for 10 years, and now you're worried about legacy. That's not fair, he snapped. Neither was what you did, I replied. He lowered his voice. We're offering a chance to fix things. No, I said, you're offering a chance to use me. The line went quiet. Finally, he spoke again slower. What do you want? That question had haunted me for a decade. I had wanted apologies, recognition, protection, a place at the table. Now I wanted something else. I want transparency, I said. About the will, about the house, about the business, everything. That's sensitive, he said. So is kicking me out after childbirth, I replied. He didn't argue. And I added any conversation going forward includes my lawyer. His breath caught. You've already hired a lawyer, he asked. Yes, I said, a long time ago. Another silence, thicker this time. I'll talk to your mother, he said finally. Good, I replied, because I'm not coming back to be grateful. I'm coming back informed. When I hung up, my hands were steady. That night after my daughter went to bed, I sat alone and let myself feel it. Not triumph, not revenge. Confirmation. They hadn't missed me. They had missed what I could provide. And that hurt in a way that felt cleaner, sharper, and somehow easier to carry than false hope. Over the next week, documents began arriving. Not all at once, not willingly, but enough. Property records, business statements, draft versions of a will that had been updated more than once over the past decade. And my name appeared nowhere. Not as beneficiary, not as backup, not even as acknowledgement. My daughter's name wasn't there either. I stared at the pages late into the night, my chest tight but my mind clear. They hadn't just disowned me emotionally. They had planned around my absence. There was a section that named future grandchildren. My daughter wasn't included. She doesn't exist to them, I whispered. I understood then that what they feared wasn't losing me. It was losing control of the story. Because if the truth came out, if people knew they had expelled their own daughter and newborn grandchild, it would fracture the image they had built so carefully. Respectable, traditional, moral. The next time we met, it was at a lawyer's office. Neutral ground. My mother looked irritated. My father looked tired. My lawyer laid out questions calmly, methodically. About why certain clauses had been removed, about why others had been added, about why I was excluded without documentation. My mother bristled. She didn't need it, she said. She's always been independent. My lawyer didn't flinch. Independence does not negate inheritance. That line stayed with me. When the meeting ended, my father pulled me aside. "We never thought you'd push this far," he said quietly. I met his eyes. "You never thought I'd survive." He didn't deny it. Driving home, my daughter asked, "Did they say sorry yet?" I shook my head. She nodded. "Then they still don't get it." I smiled. She was learning something I had learned too late. Love that demands silence is not love. And the truth was I wasn't done yet. Because now that I understood what they feared, I knew exactly where to apply pressure next. Once the documents were out in the open, I stopped guessing. I started calculating. That was the difference between the woman I had been 10 years ago and the woman sitting across from my parents' lawyer now. Back then I had begged for space, for time, for mercy. Now I asked for numbers. The house alone had nearly tripled in value since they bought it. A large portion of that value came from renovations my mother liked to describe as necessary upkeep, but the records told a different story. Additions, structural improvements, cosmetic upgrades timed suspiciously close to moments when the business needed collateral. The business itself was fragile, not failing, but vulnerable. Long-term clients were aging out, new competitors were leaner, faster, digital. My parents had ignored modernization for years, relying on loyalty and reputation. Loyalty fades, reputation doesn't pay bills. My lawyer walked me through the implications quietly without judgment. "They need liquidity," she said, "or leverage, preferably both." "And they think I'm the answer," I replied. She nodded. "They think you'll help out of obligation, or guilt." I smiled thinly. They taught me neither. The next meeting was requested quickly. Too quickly. My mother called this time, not my father. Her voice was careful, measured, polite in a way that felt foreign after years of dismissal. "We want to move forward constructively," she said. "So do I replied. "That's why my lawyer will be present." A pause. Then, of course. We met in the same neutral office. This time the tone was different. No defensiveness, no lectures, just urgency dressed up as reasonableness. My father began by explaining how complicated things had become, how hard it was to plan for retirement, how stressful it all felt. I listened without interrupting. My mother leaned forward. "We'd like you to consult for us, formally. Help us stabilize the business." I nodded. "On what terms?" She blinked. "Well, we assumed." "I don't assume," I said calmly. "I negotiate." Silence fell. My lawyer slid a document across the table. Compensation, authority, decision-making power, and one clause that mattered most. Inclusion. Not emotional inclusion. Legal inclusion. My mother's eyes scanned the page. Her lips tightened. "This is aggressive." "No," I replied. "This is appropriate." "You're asking to be added to the will," my father said, stunned. "I'm asking to be acknowledged," I corrected. "As your child, and as my daughter's parent." "That's emotional blackmail," my mother snapped. My lawyer spoke evenly. "It's a condition of engagement." They looked at each other. I watched them struggle with a realization they had avoided for years. They needed me more than I needed them. "What if we say no?" my father asked quietly. "Then I walk away," I replied, "and you find another solution." They both knew there wasn't one. That meeting ended without an agreement. But something had shifted. They stopped calling me unreasonable. They stopped suggesting I was being dramatic. They started asking questions. That week, my mother asked to see my daughter again. I said no. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. "You don't get access without accountability," I told her. "She's not a bargaining chip." My mother cried. I didn't soften. I remembered crying quietly in a motel room holding a newborn while they slept comfortably in their house. Tears had not moved them then. They would not move me now. Days later, a revised proposal arrived. My name added to the will. My daughter named as beneficiary in a separate trust. Decision-making authority outlined clearly. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. I signed nothing yet. Instead, I asked for one more thing. A family meeting. Not with lawyers. Not with documents. With truth. We met at their house again. The same living room, the same furniture, but the air felt different. Heavier. I want to hear you say it, I said, standing in front of them. Why you threw us out. My father looked at the floor. My mother spoke first. We were afraid. Of what I asked. She swallowed. Of losing control. Of what people would think. Of raising a child who didn't follow our rules. And the baby I asked. She hesitated. She represented failure. There it was. You were willing to let us suffer to protect your image, I said. My father finally looked up. His eyes were wet. I was weak, he said. I chose peace over you. The room was silent. I don't forgive you yet, I said. Maybe I never will. But I won't pretend this didn't happen. They nodded. Not agreement. Acceptance. When I left that night, I felt lighter. Not because they had changed, but because I no longer needed them to. The revenge wasn't loud. It was structural. I was rewriting the terms they had taught me. And for the first time, I wasn't asking for a place in their world. I was deciding whether they deserved a place in mine. As I drove home, my daughter texted from her room. Did it go okay? I typed back. It went honest. She replied with a heart. I smiled. Because no matter what happened next, I had already won something they could never take back. My self-respect. And the knowledge that survival had turned into power. The next chapter would be about how power changes people. Especially those who never expected you to have any at all power doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly, then alters the way people breathe when you enter a room. I noticed the shift the first time I walked into my parents' business office as a consultant, instead of a daughter who had been erased. The receptionist looked up startled. My name was on the schedule now, official, typed, not whispered. Good morning, she said, suddenly careful. I nodded and walked past her, my posture straight, my steps unhurried. I wasn't there to prove anything. That was the difference. My parents were already in the conference room when I arrived. My mother sat rigidly at the table papers aligned with unnecessary precision. My father stood near the window staring out like he was bracing himself. They looked smaller. Not physically, relationally. I placed my bag on the table and connected my laptop without asking permission. We'll start with the numbers, I said. No one objected. For years my parents had spoken over me, around me, about me. Now they listened. I laid out what I had found: declining margins, over-reliance on legacy contracts, outdated systems bleeding money slowly, invisibly. My father frowned. We've always done it this way. That's the problem, I replied. The world changed, you didn't. My mother opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. She had learned finally that I wasn't there to be managed. By the end of that meeting, decisions had been made. Not suggestions. Decisions. I left with authority clearly defined, weekly oversight, direct access to accounts, the ability to veto expenditures that didn't serve long-term stability. As I walked out, I caught my reflection in the glass wall of the hallway. I looked calm, and calm made them nervous. The change didn't go unnoticed. Longtime employees began treating me differently, some with respect, some with suspicion, a few with resentment thinly disguised as friendliness. I expected that. What I didn't expect was my mother's discomfort. She began calling more often, asking small questions, seeking reassurance disguised as collaboration. You're not planning anything drastic, are you? She asked one afternoon. Only what's necessary, I replied. She laughed weakly. You always were intense. No. I had become precise. At home, my daughter noticed the change too. You're different, she said one evening as we cooked dinner together. Different how I asked. Quieter, she replied, but stronger. I smiled. That was exactly how power should feel. The real test came a month later when a major decision had to be made. The business needed to sell one of its properties to stay solvent long-term. My parents had always refused. That property represented pride, history, the illusion of permanence. But pride doesn't keep lights on. I presented the option calmly, numbers backing every point. My father hesitated. That building was my father's. And this company was his too, I said. You're not preserving his legacy by running it into the ground. My mother crossed her arms. You're enjoying this, she accused. I looked at her steadily. No, I'm doing what you never did for me, making the hard decision instead of avoiding discomfort. The room went silent. They agreed, not because they trusted me, but because they had no better choice. That night my father called, not to argue, to apologize. I didn't know you were capable of this, he said. The words were meant as praise. They landed like proof of everything I had lost. You never looked, I replied. He was quiet. As weeks passed, the business stabilized, cash flow improved, stress levels dropped, and something else happened. My parents stopped treating me like a problem. They started treating me like a partner, but partnership without accountability is just convenience. And I wasn't done yet. Because power has a way of revealing character, and I was about to see exactly who they became when the balance was no longer in their favor. The turning point came unexpectedly. A family gathering, a holiday dinner, the same kind of table where I had once been dismissed, where silence had protected cruelty. This time I walked in with my daughter beside me, head high, shoulders relaxed. The room changed. Conversations paused. Eyes followed us. My mother rushed forward, smiling too brightly. "My granddaughter," she said. I stepped slightly in front of my daughter without making it obvious. "Careful," I said quietly. "Remember our agreement." Her smile faltered. I hadn't said no, but I hadn't said yes either. We sat at the table, the same one where years earlier I had been invisible. Now every word I spoke was heard, every pause noticed. My father raised a glass. "I'd like to thank my daughter," he said, "for helping us through a difficult time." I met his eyes. "Say my name," I said calmly. The room froze. He swallowed. "Thank you," he said again louder. "To my daughter." "Not yet, but close." That night, as we drove home, my daughter looked at me. "They're scared of you now," she said matter-of-factly. I nodded. "Not of me, of losing control." She smiled. "Good." I laughed softly, because she understood something most adults never do. Power isn't about dominance. It's about choice. And I was choosing carefully. The next chapter wouldn't be about business or money. It would be about the past catching up to the present, and how the truth once invited into the room refuses to leave quietly. Power changed the room, but it didn't erase the past. If anything, it stirred it up. The first sign came in the form of an envelope I didn't recognize. Plain, unmarked, no return address. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, slipped halfway under my door like something uncertain of its welcome. Inside was a single piece of paper. A photocopy. Hospital records. My name. A date from 10 years ago. Notes in handwriting I remembered all too well. Discharge approved. Family declined responsibility. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. I had blocked out the details of that day so thoroughly that seeing them reduced to ink and stamps felt like being pushed underwater without warning. Family declined responsibility. That wasn't memory. That was documentation. My first instinct was to call my lawyer. My second was to call my parents. I did neither. Instead, I waited. Experience had taught me that when old truths resurfaced, it was usually because someone wanted them buried again. 2 days later, my mother called. Her voice was brittle. "Did you receive something in the mail?" There it was. "Yes," I said. "I did." Silence. "Then that wasn't meant to upset you." "It wasn't meant to exist," I replied. "But it does." She exhaled shakily. "We were advised at the time to keep things minimal for privacy." "Privacy," I repeated, "or plausible deniability." She didn't answer. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. "Who sent it?" I asked. Another pause, longer this time. "I don't know," she said. I almost believed her. Almost. "Someone is afraid," I said calmly, "and it's not me." The next family meeting was not planned. It happened because my father showed up at my door unannounced that evening. He looked older than he had weeks ago. His shoulders sagged. His confidence, once worn like armor, was gone. "I thought you should hear this from me," he said. I stepped aside and let him in. He sat on the couch, hands clasped tightly, staring at the floor. "Your mother's sister," he said finally. "She's been talking." That name landed heavily. I hadn't seen my aunt in years. She had been present during my childhood, then gradually faded away. Her absence explained away with vague references to disagreements and distance. "She never approved of how we handled things," my father continued. "Back then. After the birth." I said nothing. She kept copies, he admitted. Records, notes. She said she might need them someday. And now I asked, and now he said quietly she thinks the truth should come out. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. "She's late." He flinched. "Why now?" I asked. He hesitated. "Because people are asking questions." Who? I pressed. "Extended family. Old friends. Church acquaintances," he said. "They've noticed the changes. Your involvement. Your daughter." I nodded slowly. The image they had protected for decades was cracking. "What exactly are you afraid of?" I asked. He looked up at me, eyes glassy. "That people will find out we abandoned you." There it was. Not regret. Fear. "Did you?" I asked. He swallowed. "Yes." The word hung between us. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I had already done both of those things years ago alone, when it mattered. "I won't lie for you," I said. "Not anymore." He nodded. "I know." The phone calls started soon after. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly remembered my number. Conversations began with concern and ended with probing questions. "How are you really? Why didn't we know? Is it true you were asked to leave?" I answered carefully, truthfully, without embellishment. I was told to leave after giving birth, I said. I raised my daughter on my own. That was all. People filled in the rest themselves. My mother was furious. You're letting them misunderstand us, she accused over the phone. No, I replied. I'm letting them understand. She cried, accused, pleaded. You're destroying our reputation, she said. I thought of motel rooms, of nights without sleep, of my daughter's tiny body curled against mine, while I wondered how we would survive. You built your reputation on my silence, I said. That era is over. The real confrontation happened at a family gathering I hadn't planned to attend. A birthday dinner for a cousin. Public. Social. Full of people who had known my parents for decades. I arrived with my daughter beside me. The room buzzed with forced cheer. My aunt was there. She looked at me across the table, her eyes sharp and unapologetic. When dessert was served, she stood. I'd like to say something, she announced. My mother froze. My father went pale. My aunt's voice was steady. There are stories families tell themselves to feel comfortable, and there are truths they bury to protect appearances. She turned to me. This young woman, she said, was asked to leave her parents' home days after giving birth. She was abandoned, and she survived. The room went silent. My mother stood abruptly. That is not how it happened. My aunt looked at her coolly. I have the records. My daughter squeezed my hand. I stood then. I didn't come here to expose anyone, I said. I came because I refused to keep pretending. I looked at my parents. This is the cost of silence, I said. No one argued, because the truth had finally found witnesses. That night as we drove home, my daughter asked softly, "Are you okay?" I thought about it. Yes, I said, I am. Because revenge wasn't shouting. It wasn't humiliation. It was letting the truth breathe after being suffocated for 10 years. And the truth, once released, never goes back into hiding. The next chapter would be about consequences, not the dramatic kind, the quiet ones that change everything forever. Consequences rarely arrive the way people imagine them. There was no public shaming campaign, no screaming matches, no dramatic apologies delivered on bended knee. What followed was quieter than that, slower, more unsettling. People began to pull away, not from me, from them. The first sign came when my mother's longtime friend canceled lunch. No explanation, just a polite text about being busy. Then another invitation went unanswered. Then a church committee my parents had served on for years quietly rotated leadership without mentioning it. No confrontation, just distance. My father noticed it first. They're acting strange, he said during one of our weekly business check-ins. I didn't respond. He shifted in his chair. People won't return my calls. I kept my eyes on the financial reports. That happens, I said. He waited, then added, "They're talking." Yes, I replied, "They are." My mother reacted differently. She oscillated between denial and fury. One moment insisting that everything was fine, the next accusing me of turning the family against her. "You could have stopped this," she said during a phone call late one night. "I did," I replied, "for 10 years. The silence on the line was sharp. The business ironically continued to improve. Numbers don't care about reputation. Systems don't care about gossip. The restructuring I had implemented began to pay off. New clients signed on. Old debts were renegotiated. My parents' livelihood stabilized even as their social standing quietly eroded. That irony was not lost on me. One afternoon, my father asked a question that surprised me. "Do you hate us?" he asked. I looked up slowly. "No," I said, "I don't." He seemed relieved. "I just stopped protecting you from the truth," I continued. He nodded, absorbing that. "I thought if we stayed silent it would all fade," he admitted. "It doesn't," I said. "It accumulates." The most difficult moment came unexpectedly. My mother asked to see my daughter. Alone. "No," I said immediately. She cried, "I'm her grandmother." "You're a stranger to her," I replied. "Those aren't the same thing." "That's cruel," she snapped. "No," I said calmly. "It's accurate." I offered an alternative. Supervised visits. Boundaries. Accountability. She refused. She wanted access without acknowledgement. That door stayed closed. My daughter, for her part, seemed lighter than she had in months. "They don't scare you anymore," she said one evening as we folded laundry together. "They never did," I replied. "I just forgot that for a while." She smiled. "I like you like this." So did I. The final consequence arrived not through confrontation, but through paperwork. The revised will was finalized. My name was added. My daughter's trust was secured, not as an act of love, as an act of necessity. My parents signed the documents in silence. No celebration, no acknowledgement, just the scratching of pens on paper. Afterward, my mother looked at me with something close to resentment. "You got what you wanted," she said. I met her gaze steadily. "No, I got what you denied." She had no reply. Weeks passed. Life settled into a new rhythm. My parents called less. When they did, it was formal, cautious, like people who knew the rules had changed and were afraid to test them. The power imbalance was gone. That was the real consequence. One evening, my father showed up again, older, slower. I wish I had done things differently, he said. I believed him. But belief didn't mean reversal. I needed you then, I said. Not now. He nodded. I know. As he left, I felt something loosen inside me. Not forgiveness. Release. Because consequences aren't about punishment. They're about alignment. The truth had aligned everyone with reality. And reality doesn't negotiate. The next chapter wouldn't be about them anymore. It would be about me deciding what came next, and whether reconciliation was even something I wanted. Because sometimes the greatest revenge is not destroying the people who hurt you. It's building a life where their approval is irrelevant. After the will was signed and the trust finalized, everyone seemed to assume the story was over. That was the part that surprised me most. My parents behaved as if the documents had closed a chapter, not just legally, but emotionally. As if acknowledging me on paper somehow erased a decade of absence. As if fairness delayed was fairness restored. They were wrong. What came next wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself with arguments or ultimatums. It arrived quietly in the space that opened up once the fight was over and I was left alone with myself. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I wasn't bracing for the next call, the next manipulation, the next demand disguised as concern. I was choosing. The realization hit me one evening as I watched my daughter do her homework at the kitchen table. She was 10 now. Taller, more confident. Her hair fell into her eyes as she concentrated pencil moving steadily across the page. She looked safe. That wasn't an accident. I had built that safety from nothing. From motel rooms and secondhand furniture, and nights when I cried silently so she wouldn't hear. From jobs that barely paid enough and mornings that came too early. I had built it without my parents. The question now wasn't whether I could forgive them. It was whether I wanted them in the life I had created. They began reaching out again tentatively at first. A message from my mother asking how my daughter was doing in school. A call from my father about a minor business update that didn't actually require my input. Invitations framed as casual, low-pressure, easy. Dinner sometime, my father said. No agenda. I heard what he didn't say. Come back. Resume your role. Make this feel normal again. Normal for them had always required my silence. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I paid attention to how I felt when their names appeared on my phone. Not anxious, not hopeful, tired. That told me everything. One Saturday morning, my daughter asked if we could go to the park. It was early spring. The air was cool but bright, the kind of day that feels like a promise. We sat on a bench while she played. I watched her laugh with other kids, confident and unafraid, and something inside me softened. Mom, she said later, sitting beside me, do you ever wish things were different? I knew exactly what she meant. Sometimes I said honestly. Do you wish your parents were nicer? She asked. I considered that carefully. I wish they had been, I said. But wishing doesn't change people. She nodded slowly, absorbing it. I'm glad you're my mom. The simplicity of that statement nearly undid me. That night, after she went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a list. Not of grievances, of truths. I don't need their approval. I don't owe them access to my child. Reconciliation is a choice, not an obligation. Boundaries are not punishment. Seeing it written down made it real. The next time my father called, I answered. We'd like to see you, he said, just to talk. I took a breath. About what? About moving forward, he replied. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. Then we need to be clear. He waited. I'm not rebuilding a relationship to make you feel better, I said. I'm not pretending the past didn't happen. And I'm not offering my daughter as proof that we're okay. Silence. That sounds final, he said. It's honest, I replied. He exhaled. What does that mean exactly? It means limited contact, I said. On my terms. It means accountability without constant rehashing. And it means accepting that we may never be close. Another long pause. I don't know if your mother can accept that, he admitted. I know, I said. That's not my responsibility. We ended the call politely. I felt no rush of guilt afterward, no second guessing, just a steady calm. Weeks passed. My parents adjusted or pretended to. Fewer calls, shorter conversations, less pressure. They were learning slowly that access to my life was no longer guaranteed. The business continued to stabilize. I maintained my role professional and contained. No personal favors, no emotional labor. At work, I was offered a leadership position, more responsibility, more visibility. I accepted, not because I needed to prove anything, but because I had earned it. One evening, as I tucked my daughter into bed, she asked, Are we going to see your parents again? Maybe, I said, if it feels right. She thought about that. If it doesn't feel right, we don't have to. I smiled. Exactly. That was the moment I knew the cycle had truly broken. Not because my parents had changed, but because I had. The revenge I imagined years ago had been sharp and dramatic, a moment where they finally saw what they lost and felt it deeply. What I got instead was better. I got a life that didn't revolve around their recognition. A child who knew she was wanted. A future that wasn't built on fear of abandonment. The final chapter wasn't about punishment. It was about freedom. And it was finally mine. Freedom doesn't feel the way people expect. There was no rush of joy when I realized I no longer needed my parents' approval. No dramatic moment where everything suddenly felt light and easy. What came instead was a strange quiet heaviness, the weight of everything that had never been said, everything that would never be repaired. I felt it most strongly on ordinary days, a parent-teacher conference where other parents arrived as couples or with grandparents in tow. A school performance where my daughter scanned the audience and then smiled when she spotted only me. A doctor's appointment form that asked for emergency contacts, and I paused before writing down the same friend I always wrote down. I wasn't lonely, but I was aware that something fundamental had been missing, and that no amount of independence erased that truth. My parents sensed the shift too. They stopped pushing, stopped demanding, stopped pretending we were on the verge of reconciliation. Instead, they adopted a tone that felt resigned, as if they were finally understanding that this wasn't a phase. One afternoon, my mother called unexpectedly. "I found some of your things," she said. I closed my eyes. "What kind of things?" "Old boxes," she replied. "From your room before you left." "Before you left? Not before we told you to leave." "I can drop them off," she added quickly, "or you can pick them up." I thought about it. About those boxes sitting untouched for a decade like artifacts from a life that had been cut off mid-sentence. "I'll come by," I said. When I arrived, the boxes were stacked neatly in the hallway. My mother stood nearby, hands clasped, watching me like she was bracing for impact. I opened the first box slowly. Childhood notebooks, a stuffed animal missing one eye, report cards with my parents' signatures at the bottom, proof they had once paid attention. In the second box, I found letters, unsent. Letters I had written in my early 20s. Letters explaining myself, apologizing, asking for understanding, promising to do better. I didn't remember writing some of them, but I remembered the feeling. Hope. I swallowed hard. "I never sent these," I said quietly. My mother looked at the floor. "We found them after you left." And I asked. She hesitated. "We thought you were being dramatic." The word landed with a dull thud. I nodded. "Of course you did." She looked up at me, then eyes glossy. I didn't know how to fix things. "You didn't try," I replied, not accusing, just stating fact. She flinched. In the third box, at the very bottom, I found something that stopped me cold. A small envelope. Inside was a hospital bracelet. Mine. The one from the night I gave birth. I stared at it, the plastic brittle with age, my name faded but still legible. "You kept this?" I asked. My mother nodded slowly. I couldn't throw it away. I felt something twist in my chest. Not relief, not vindication. Grief. "You knew," I said softly. "You knew what that night meant." She didn't answer. I closed the box. "I'll take them," I said. At the door, she touched my arm, hesitant, unsure. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said, "but I think about it every day." I looked at her, really looked. For the first time, I saw not authority or judgment, but fear. Fear of aging, fear of regret, fear of being remembered accurately. "I believe you," I said. Her shoulders sagged with relief. "That doesn't change anything," I added. Her face fell. "Belief isn't reconciliation," I said. "It's just acknowledgement." We stood there in silence, the distance between us finally named, instead of denied. That night at home, I showed my daughter the boxes. She touched the stuffed animal carefully. "This was yours." "Yes," I smiled. She picked up one of the letters, careful not to read it. "Were you sad?" "Yes," I said honestly, very. She leaned into me. "You're not sad now." "No," I said, "I'm not." That was when I realized something important. Healing doesn't mean forgetting pain. It means carrying it without letting it decide your future. A week later, my father asked if we could talk alone. We met at a quiet cafe. He looked older than I remembered, slower, less certain. "I failed you," he said without preamble. I blinked. He had never said anything like that before. "I should have protected you," he continued. "I should have chosen you." I waited. "I can't undo it," he said, "but I needed you to hear it." I nodded. "I hear you." He looked hopeful. "Does that mean—" "No," I said gently. He nodded, tears welling. "I understand." And for the first time, I believed him. As I drove home, I felt something loosen. Not forgiveness, not closure. Acceptance. The story was almost over. One chapter remained. And it wouldn't be about them at all. It would be about what I chose to carry forward. And what I finally set down. The last thing to change was not my relationship with my parents. It was the way I remembered myself. For years, when I thought about the night they told me to leave, the image froze in one position. Me sitting on a hospital bed, exhausted and terrified, holding a newborn, while two people I trusted turned away. I remembered myself as small, powerless, abandoned. That image had shaped more of my life than I realized. It wasn't until everything settled, until the documents were signed and the truth spoken aloud, that I saw something different in that memory. I saw a woman who stayed, who didn't beg, who took her child and walked into the unknown instead of handing her over to people who had already failed them both. That woman had been stronger than I ever gave her credit for. Life didn't suddenly become perfect after that realization. It became honest. My parents and I settled into a distant, polite relationship. Occasional updates, neutral conversations, no pretending we were something we weren't. They accepted slowly and imperfectly that access to my life was no longer automatic. Sometimes I saw regret in their eyes. Sometimes I saw relief. Both belonged to them. Neither belonged to me. The business continued to run smoothly. Eventually, I stepped back from daily involvement, leaving systems in place that no longer required my constant oversight. I negotiated my exit carefully, cleanly. No drama, no leverage abused. I had never wanted control. I had wanted choice. At home, my world was quieter. Mornings filled with routine, breakfast conversations, school drop-offs, evenings with homework spread across the kitchen table and laughter that came easily now. My daughter grew into herself. She became observant, kind, confident in a way I hadn't been at her age. She asked hard questions and expected real answers. She knew she was wanted. That mattered more than anything I could ever leave her in a will. One night as I tucked her in, she asked, "Do you think Grandma and Grandpa are happy?" I paused. "I think they're learning," I said. "Late, but learning." She nodded. "I'm glad you didn't give me to them." I felt my throat tighten. "So am I," said. Years ago, revenge had meant something sharp in my mind. A moment where they would finally feel the pain they caused, a scene where they would be exposed and humbled and left with nothing but regret. What I learned instead was this: true revenge doesn't look backward. It builds forward. It looks like a child who never doubts she belongs. It looks like a woman who no longer explains her worth. It looks like boundaries that hold even when people beg. The night my parents threw me out, they believed they were teaching me a lesson. They were right. They just never imagined what I would learn. I learned that love without protection is not love, that silence favors the powerful, not the right, that dignity does not require permission. Most of all, I learned that being cast out did not make me disposable. It made me free. If you're listening to this and you've ever been told directly or quietly that you were too much, too inconvenient, too embarrassing to be supported when you needed it most, hear this clearly. You are not weak because you survived without help. You are strong because you had no choice and still chose yourself. Sometimes the people who hurt us never fully understand the damage they caused. Sometimes they apologize too late. Sometimes they never do. Closure does not come from them. It comes from deciding what you will no longer carry. I carried my daughter forward. I carried my integrity forward. I carried the truth forward. And I left the shame where it belonged, behind me. If this story resonated with you, if it mirrored something you lived through or are still living through, share your thoughts in the comments. You are not alone even when it feels that way. And if you want to hear more stories about family betrayal resilience and the quiet power of choosing yourself, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay. Because sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money or property. It's the life you build after you're told you don't belong.